Brian, thank you so much for joining me here at LSI Europe. Tell me first a little bit about yourself.
So my background, I'm an orthopedic surgeon by training, and my career path, I guess, was wanted to be in orthopedic surgery. And on that early journey, I had I guess, a light bulb moment for ankle fractures. What I saw in my early practice, I was only a resident, that for a certain subset of ankle fractures, you needed to come back for a second surgery. And I thought, this is the 21st century, this is bonkers. They're called syndesmosis injuries. And the way they're usually treated was putting a screw across the two bones. And when the patient's then rehabbed, the screw would toggle and either break loose, or surgeons will elect to take it out. And I thought, this is nuts, we need to do something better than that. So the solution to that was putting two buttons on either side of the ankle, pulling a suture tight between the two bones, and we called it the tightrope, or subsequently called it the tightrope. And I went and developed that, and did a small clinical trial in Ireland, and patients did really well. And then companies I pitched it to every company that would listen to me, and I ended up signing a contract with Arthrex in Naples, Florida, and the tightrope just took off from there.
Tell me a bit about your company.
So Tightrope, Tightrope isn't the company. So Tightrope is my first success, and although it was a little bit of struggle on the way, it was a very enjoyable journey for me, and I thought I wanted to replicate this. So I was always on the lookout really for other problems in orthopedics. And the big problem, I think, that most orthopedic surgeons would recognize is osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is when the bones get weak in old people, and cause them to fracture a little bit more easily. But by the same token, when you put in any implant, particularly a screw into osteoporotic bone, it toggles and comes loose. So it's very hard to get fixation. And you can do things like put in extra polymers or cement, or use bigger implants, or do other ways around it. But so one of the innovation that the second light bulb moment for me is when I was putting an expanding bolt into the wall. I was putting up a TV screen on my apartment wall, and I was thinking, this is so simple. Why don't we have this in orthopedics? And that was the light bulb moment, and we went forth with that. So the biggest problem, or the biggest manifestation for osteoporosis, is hip fractures. And hip fractures are in a very elderly population. It's in the 80s and 90s. And people will probably have stories that their grandmother or their aunt's friend or whatever, they fell at home and they broke their hip, and they're never quite right afterwards, and they were a very dependent lifestyle, and until they died. And it's very unfortunate that it is one of the last things that happens to very frail, mostly women. I just felt, in the hospital, if they could be treated better, you could actually give them a better chance in their sort of autumn of their lives, and mobilize them a little bit better, and not have the complications of a failed hip surgery.
That's great. You're using technology to improve quality of life for those that are truly in need of it. Almost, as you said, they were enjoying movement. An accident unfortunately happens. It's not just osteoporosis and osteodegenerative diseases, but stroke too. My grandfather, he had a stroke, and while he was in the hospital, he fell, broke his hip.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So would this technology be applicable there, or is there?
Yeah, it would. Yeah. So it's it's more prevalent in women. One in 6 women will actually get a hip fracture in their lifetime. So it's more. A woman is more likely to get a hip fracture in her life than she is breast cancer. But yet, breast cancer gets hits the headlines a bit more. And even in hospitals, they're usually very elderly and have other medical conditions, which takes some of the emphasis, or the sympathy away from them, if that's the case. But if you treat them well, if you fix it properly with proper implants and mobilize them properly, they get out of hospital more. They're less likely to have then problems with pneumonias, leg ulcers, DVTs. They're less costly overall. The cost for a patient episode for a hip fracture is $50,000 for the indexing, but if it goes wrong, it's an additional $40,000 on average for when it goes wrong. So if you can prevent any of these problems, you'll not only save the patient and their family all that hardship, but also save a lot of money in the process.
So what's the current standard of care for patients that, they break their hip because of osteoporosis? What are they doing, and how is your technology sort of innovating or changing the way, the paradigm perhaps of how you treat these patients?
Yeah, well, similarly, the way that the tightrope actually changed. Tightrope is a very simple device. I mean, you think about it. I mean, a lot of people would say, "Oh, why didn't I think of that before?" And similarly with the X bolt, it's going from a screw to an expanding bolt, so it's not a huge jump in changing the whole paradigm of surgery. But the great thing about an expanding bolt is that what the standard of care is usually putting a nail down through the femur and then shooting the screw up through the nail and holding into the femoral head. But the great thing about the expanding bolt is you shoot the bolt through the nail, but then it expands on the far side, so you get a much bigger fixation. You can use the full real estate of the femoral head to get your fixation there. And the great thing about the technology then, it's also applicable for other areas in the body that have osteoporosis, like the spine, the distal femur, proximal humerus. So we've adapted our technology now to go into other areas.
That's incredible. What is the X bolt made out of?
So it's very simple. We started off with stainless steel, now we make it in titanium. There's quite a lot of internal engineering that makes it sort of smart, and we've spent a lot of time designing that. When we went, it took about 2 years to go from stainless steel to titanium. It was a little bit of a struggle at times, but the end product, we are happy that it is a very simple product for the surgeon to use. So they don't have to worry about what the internal engineering is all about. They just take a screwdriver, open it up, and then if there's a problem, you put the screwdriver in again and turn it down, and it collapses down. You can take it out. So the surgeon's always in control of where they're at with the product.
Tell us how it works. You've got your bolt, X bolt, correct?
Yep.
Right here. How does it work?
So this is one of the competitor screws. So that's the standard screw that would go into, the type of thing that would go into normal hip fractures up into the femoral head. Mm-hmm. And this is the expanding bolt. Now it comes in its collapsed state, goes in, and then with the screwdriver up the back end, it opens up these 4 wings. It's 4 wings because you can always see it then on AP and lateral X-rays. And it's like it gives the surgeon total control. If there's a problem, they can pull it back and collapse it down.
That's great to see it in person here. What does the market opportunity look like for this technology?
So the market for hip fractures, so our lead products, the hip fracture market, we do have coming in underneath a lot of the other areas that I said. But just looking at the hip fracture market alone, it is just short of $1 billion market. The main players in it are Synthase, Stryker, and Smith & Nephew, and they dominate the market. But there are a number of other players, tier 2 players that are getting in and doing other trauma products. And we've spoken to a lot of them. I think they like our technology. They're certainly looking at it. And again, going back to the tightrope had the monopoly of what it does, and now all those big players are copying tightrope. So I think that X-bolt will change the standard of care. It's moving evolutionary from a screw to an expanding bolt, that it gives a better fixation in these fractures.
Your previous technology was acquired by Arthrex. Is acquisition or an exit, is that sort of the strategy right now for X-bolt, or is it to continue to scale up? Tell me a bit about what the strategy is.
Sure. So our company, we've been around for about 15 years, and we've been an R&D company. We've done clinical trials. We did 2 big clinical trials actually here in the UK. The first one was 100 patients, and the second one then was over 1,000 patients, which actually was the largest ever hip fracture fixation trial in the world. It was a randomized control trial, and it compared our X-bolt against the screw. And we came out better. Mm-hmm. We had less cutout complications. Cutout is when the screw or the bolt cuts out of the femoral head. It actually literally just cuts out. It's like if you're pulling a screw out of a wall. It's the same thing, but it's not compatible then with walking around, because you have this screw that's essentially scraping on your hip every time you walk. So it necessitates a second operation, and that's the big problem that we're trying to get around. So we have the number of cutouts versus a screw. And even in the trials, the two groups actually had quite low cutout rates. So we were half that of the screw in the trial, but we were 75% less than what would be deemed the running average of cutout rates.
Is cutout, is that a pretty common complication then?
It's seen a lot because hip fractures are, most hospitals will probably be doing one hip fracture a day. Your typical hospital would do 200, 300 cases a year. So they just come in day after day. Thankfully they don't all arrive on one day, but sometimes you do get a run on hip fractures. But it is a constant number of hip fractures done day in, day out. So actually when you see that volume, and it's 3.5% of the cutout rate. So it's something that surgeons would see reasonably often, like 3 or 4 times a year that they'd probably see it. So I mean they're used to it, and there is a bailout plan. But like I said, it costs about $40,000 of additional costs, and the patient is yet more debilitated because they're frail. They've had one operation, they're even frailer because of that, and then they have a problem, and then they have a second operation. It really puts them down at a disadvantage.
So as a surgeon, have you actually implanted your own technology in patients?
I have assisted on them. I haven't actually. I've done cadaver courses, but I have had other surgeons then put it in on my behalf.
Okay.
But it is quite when you say that, actually, there's there's the warm fuzzy feeling you have, say, at the birth of a child. I've had that sort of warm fuzzy feeling twice now, because I actually did the very first tightrope operation. I remember it, and it was December 2004, and nobody else cared in the whole operating theatre, and I was really excited that this was the first tightrope ever going in, and sure enough, it went very well, and it was all internal glow. And I was, it was the same thing for the very first X-bolt to go in. It was a friend of mine, who was a surgeon, who was putting it in, but the same warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that you had the first in man of the product that you invented.
I can't even imagine what it feels like to see your product being actually utilized.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. And then you hear stories. I gave a story in my pitch. Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters, he's got one of my tightrope in him.
No kidding.
So it was, people might have heard the story. So he was playing in Gothenburg in Sweden, and he fell off stage. It was at the beginning of his set, and he was down there and said, "Oh, I think I broke my leg," and sure enough, he had. But they wanted to wheel him off, and he said, no, I've got to continue the set. So he was there, he was strapped up, and he was still rocking away. So he did 26 songs with his legs strapped up, and then after it was all over, he carted him off to hospital. But then he tweeted then on his on the Foo Fighters Twitter thing of his fixation, and people were, I didn't see this all happening, but I was shown his Twitter thing. It's got your tightrope in, it's got your tightrope in. So that was cool.
That's incredible. Well, we're here at LSI Europe. What brings you to this event?
So we're like I said to you, we're an R&D company by and large, and we've gone through all these clinical trials and FDA approvals and the like, and we're looking to engage and network with some of the investors that are here and the strategics. Like I said, we have talked to a number of strategics, but it's an ongoing kind of process with them, de-risking the product in our journey. So we are looking to network and get a investment round to commercialize this in the US.
Exciting. So are you currently in Europe then?
We are currently in the UK and Ireland.
Okay.
And we're looking to launch in the US probably
pretty big
early
market.
next year. Yes, we'll probably just focus geographically in one small area to begin with.
Okay. And then build your sales.
And build out from there. But again, if there's the excitement levels are the same as what was with the tightrope and the nice hockey stick curve going up, I think then we might attract a bit of attention.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for telling me a bit about your story and your company.
Thank you
It's been
so
a pleasure.
much. Yeah, thank you very much indeed.